So, Your Grace, could you just tell the story of how you were approached and what happened next?
The story goes back a little way, so I'll just do the more recent weeks. A few weeks ago, I should think 6-7 weeks ago, Charles Moore of the Daily Telegraph approached me for a private meeting, and when he met me, he said that sitting next to dinner he found himself next to Lady Montague Brown, Lady Sheila Montague Brown, who is the widow of Sir Anthony Montague Brown, and that she had told him that she suspected, and her husband, who died 3 years ago, had suspected that I was Sir Anthony's son, based on how I looked. And so that's how it began, and it seemed to me that the obvious thing, we had obviously a fairly lengthy discussion. We looked at the dates, and it seemed to me to be highly unlikely, and because I didn't want to cause a fuss and make a whole hoo-ha about this, so the easiest thing was to do a DNA test. So we did a DNA test, and during Holy Week, I was actually in a playgroup in my diocese in a parish, surrounded by children doing all kinds of mad exercises which I was involved in, and this email arrived, and I went and looked at it, and there it took me. So that's how it happened.
So how did you feel when you got the results of the DNA test? Were you embarrassed in any way?
Oh no, not embarrassed in any way. I suppose I thought, well, that's very interesting. I said to Charles Moore in the interview that I suspect that most of us process these things relatively slowly. And so I didn't have hysterics or anything. I put the phone back in my pocket and got on with the playgroup. It didn't have any great effect on me.
Did you ever meet Anthony Montague Brown?
I very vaguely remember that as a small child, before I went away to boarding school, when I was over 8, I vaguely remember meeting him perhaps twice, 3 times. It may have been more, but that's all I remember.
How has this affected the family, your mother particularly?
Well, as you may imagine, I rang my mother the next day, and we had a long conversation. My mother is someone who is extraordinarily courageous. She's one of these people who looks facts in the face and just says, well, if that's reality, then we better deal with it. And so she was obviously very shocked. She said that in her own statement. But DNA test's a DNA test. So we then sat down and thought about what impact this would have and how we would deal with it.
And your wife and children, how have they coped?
Oh, they were wonderful. I mean, they're just wonderful. I mean, they were incredibly supportive of their grandmother, of my mother. The children were. They were just hugely supportive. They adore her. And they made that very clear, and that nothing had changed. And Caroline is invariably just doesn't get flustered. So she said, right, well, so what do we do now?
How has this affected your view of your father Gavin?
Of my father Gavin? It hasn't changed my view of him. I suppose there's a sense, he died in 1977, and life with him was quite often quite messy. It was relatively complicated because of his alcoholism, and I was really the sole relation I knew of that he had. So I suppose I look back and think I'm quite glad he wasn't aware of it, and it's perfectly clear that he wasn't, because I think that would have made life even more complicated. But I spent a lot of my childhood with him, and although it was complicated and messy, I was always aware of his very deep love towards me, and that's something you don't discard.
So has this changed the way you perceive yourself to be?
Well, if I'm really honest, it hasn't changed the way I perceive myself in any way at all that I'm aware of. I mean, I have the same life history I had before. I have the same friends I have before. Nothing in that sense has changed. And the most important thing for me that hasn't changed is that I came to faith in Christ, to a living faith in Christ, and the experience of the reality of Jesus Christ when I was about 19 or 20. And absolutely nothing has changed. That is my identity. I said in my statement, I am who I am in Jesus Christ, and nothing more or less than that. Nothing changes. So I don't feel any different.
Do you think this affects your credibility in the church in any way, or invalidates your consecration?
It certainly doesn't invalidate my consecration. We did check the rules, and the rules changed in 1950. It would have made life very complicated if that had been the case, to put it mildly. I think how people see me in their church, I think, judging from the emails and the reaction publicly, it doesn't make a shred of difference. The people will judge me on who I am and what I do, not on my genetic makeup.